all of the negotiators, they have to go back to their home countries and explain young people what they did there.
After Egypt, now in Dubai, there was a really huge concern about how can we talk at the COP as civil society if you see that local civil society actors are imprisoned or civil society space is not actually there.
Like, how do we localize all these conversations that are happening at global level to grassroots level, or rather this at the community level? And about my work at grassroots level. So at the moment, we're focusing on a project to build climate resilience and gender equality in a pastoralist community setting. So pastoralist basically just means a community that depends entirely on livestock keeping for sustenance. So I decided for COP28, we're going to have a specific agenda that's really concerning to the people we are representing. And we decided to focus on the loss and damage fund because even in our course of work, we realized that these people have already experienced immense losses and damages. So it's really not easy for them to start adapting or building climate resilience when they only depend on donor aid because they don't have money to practice other alternative sources of livelihood. They just have to depend on donor aid to kickstart them before they do, because they're already poor. They've lost tons of cattle. They've become poorer and poorer as time goes by. So when they need that compensation first, that can be used for them, to step up and now move on to maybe keeping more resilient types of animals or practice some other forms of, businesses or climate smart agriculture and all that. So our most important advocacy topic is on loss and damage. And we started the year thinking, we needed to bring all the pastoralists together, synchronize them into one, one common agenda for all the pastoralists so that we could speak on their behalf or elevate, their voices. So with the support of Sudwind, of course, which we are so grateful for, we managed to host this consultation across 3 different counties and collect their messages into one document, key messages for COP28 from these pastoralist leaders. And this was what actually gave me the passion to go to COP, because I had something that I was bringing on board. I had something that I would be keen to push into the negotiation track. So when I went to COP, I was specifically just following up on loss and damage negotiations. And we were actually so happy and excited that during the first day of COP, the fund was operationalized by pledges from different countries. And by the end of it, around $700 million was pledged. When it comes to, ensuring that these funds actually reach grassroots communities, I think that's where the challenge will pop up again, because from my perspective, I feel like the UNFCCC processes are extremely complex. That's how I envision it. We're talking about organizations that are pastoralist-led, that are working with pastoralists, and this funds channeled through this organization, even if it's through an application to a grant under the Loss and Damage Fund. But can this organization be prioritized? Because we have the pastoralist interest at heart. We are pastoralists ourselves, or even the county governments in Kenya that are hosting a majority of these communities that are most affected by climate change.
So we also have had lots of advocacy meetings, lots of bilaterals. And the impression I had was that youth involvement is quite good. Young people are being taken seriously most of the time, but it kind of depends on the topic as well. So when it comes to youth involvement, of course, we're quite hurt. There are lots of meetings, also with the European delegation. We had bilaterals and that. But of course, it's way harder to influence when it comes to to the real positions when it comes to the fossil fuel phase out, for instance, as this is just really hard to influence. So, yeah. And also there are some countries like Ukraine that don't have youth delegate programs at all. So, yeah, this kind of makes it harder for young people from these countries actually to be heard and to be invited also with the delegation and to have access. So there was this first draft with a menu of options. So this first draft that was leaked, that came out, it was really bad and people were quite disappointed. So all of the negotiators went into some final negotiations. And what people did, young people, were forming lines. So the politicians, the negotiators, the politicians had to go between those lines of young people into the negotiation room. And there was no shouting or chanting because it was not allowed. It was only a silent protest. So young people were simply standing there. But you could see in the eyes of the negotiators, for instance, the EU, they wanted a more progressive draft. So there were some negotiators who were thanking us even, saying it's important to be here. And the EU, they were doing the silent protest. They were wearing a small badge which said, "Is this enough?" So this was their form of protest. And there were other negotiators, especially from countries like Saudi Arabia, I assume, that can look those young people in the eyes. They only looked on the floor. And I think this kind of showed that how important it is to hold politicians accountable, because all of the negotiators, they have to go back to their home countries and explain young people what they did there. And this is something we have to do at COP, and this is something we have to do in our home countries throughout the year.
But also from the civil society side, it was another COP in a country where there's almost no space for civil society. Of course, there was this UN space, the COP itself, which is not perceived as or not seen as part of the country, but the UN space. And there were those protest sites that Jasmin mentioned. But after Egypt, now in Dubai, there was a really huge concern about how can we talk at the COP as civil society if you see that local civil society actors are imprisoned or civil society space is not actually there. But also on the positive side, we can see that several oil-dependent states are trying to diversify their economy away from the dependence on fossil fuels. The Emirate of Dubai itself, one of the Emirates of the United Arab Emirates, used to have over 50% of their GDP from the fossil fuels. Today, according to some studies, it's less than 1% of their GDP is dependent on the fossil fuel sector. They really succeeded in diversifying their economy. So there are some positive signals, but the context was difficult.
So I also believe that the results, the transitioning away from fossil fuels, it was a win. It is a big sign, a big international sign also to economy. But still, we cannot stop now. We're not done yet. It's a marathon, and we're in the middle of it. We need to phase out fossil fuels. This is clear. This is clear to science. This is clear to young people. There's simply no other way if you want to really mitigate the climate crisis. And what we need to do now, Austria needs to do its homework, because we cannot simply make promises on the international level and then come back and wait a year for the next COP. This is also what Martin has said with the nationally determined contributions. These conferences live from what's happening between the year. So what the countries do, what mitigation measures countries take.
But Austria also has a homework to do in filling the loss and damage fund, because Austria didn't provide anything for this new fund yet, giving good reasons actually to saying that they're using their dedicated loss and damage money that was pledged 2 years ago or 2 COPs ago already now, which is actually a good sign, but we really need Austria to contribute to this fund as well. But we also need bilateral, maybe multilateral agreements between the main players. I'm looking to US and China. How are they going to work together in the coming 2 years? But also the EU. How is the EU going to work on its new climate target, considering upcoming elections in several major blocs?
Or rather, what my key takeaway was as the same. And as I had mentioned earlier about localization, I really believe that this is something that needs to be focused on. Like, how do we localize all these conversations that are happening at global level to grassroots level, or rather this at the community level, so that it's actually more impactful? Because I find it really exclusive to be having these conversations without the communities that are most affected, and it really feels like we're just waiting for another COP to travel and just do touristic businesses, rather than just coming up with critical answers, or rather solutions to whatever menace that we are facing.